As some of you may or may not know this, a lot of you do though, but periodically, I decide that, you know what, I'm going to read through the entire Bible in a year. And I'm happy to say it took me a year and a half this time to do it, what I normally do in a year, but I did it in a year and a half. Just as a matter of fact, as of yesterday, I finished up. It's like I started in September of, not last year, but the year before, and finally got through the whole thing. And so on Friday, I was down to my very last book, which was the book of Ruth. Okay? And Ruth is kind of one of those hard books. It's a hard book to find. If you try to find Ruth, usually you pass it up because it comes after, or it comes just before 1 Samuel. And I'm the type of person, when I start reading the Bible, I don't start in Genesis and run my way through, and I don't do those, you can bounce around all over the Bible on those Bible apps, like read this, then go to there, then. I don't like doing that either. I like to just read once I get going, but I never start in Genesis. I always seem to start in 1 Samuel because I love the story of David. And David just like kickstarts me, the story of Hannah at the beginning, and then I make my way around. And I got to tell you, thank God for Ruth, because I thought I was ending at Judges. And Judges is not a good place to end if you're ever reading the Bible. And so I thought, if I had to end in Judges, I would not start in 1 Samuel. But I do want to say, Judges is a very exciting book to read, but it is way too depressing to end on, if I can say that, right? And so any story that continuously repeats this, and Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And it ends this way: in those days there were no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Now, if you come across those scriptures a lot of times, you know that it's not going to be a good lead-in to whatever else you want to read next, right? That is just not a good place to stop. And so, the book of Ruth. Ruth is actually set in the time of the Judges, as a matter of fact. And it begins rather bleakly, but then it builds into this delightful account of a remnant of believers who really do exhibit true faith and true piety during really a period that was very dismal and very dark. And so Ruth, in case you haven't figured this out, there's only 2 books in the entire Bible that bear females' names. And it is Ruth and
Esther.
Esther, right. Only 2, but we're in there, you guys. We're in there. So, we are on a winter series, and the series that we're in is called What's Your Lean? What's your lean? When you are hard pressed, or even when you're going through something good and well, what is it that really you lean into that carries you along? What is that? And so as followers of Jesus, we really should be exhibiting a different kind of lean in our lives than those who don't know, or better yet said, don't practice Jesus' ways, right? Okay, because we can know stuff and still not practice it. And so what are we leaning into? And so the contrast between the books of Ruth and Judges really made me think about the lean that I wanted to talk about today. And the lean I want to talk about is leaning into integrity. Integrity. Now, before I define what integrity means, let me show you the difference between these 2 Old Testament books, between Ruth and Judges. They're great examples of what integrity is and what integrity is not. And so, the book of Judges describes the life of Israel in the Promised Land after the death of Joshua, right? Okay, Joshua was their leader. We already know that Moses has died earlier and that he left Joshua in charge to take them victoriously into this acquired land that God had promised them, right? And so, when the book of Judges opens, they're supposed to occupy the land, cleanse the land from paganism, and they're supposed to enter into this beautiful time of rest. Well, after Joshua dies, Israel lost sight of her unique identity with God and as God's chosen people. They just kind of went crazy after they got comfortable. And instead, she started attaching herself to the Canaanite people. Israel started to grab hold of their morals, to grab hold of their gods, and I'm talking little g gods. And Israel adapted their religious beliefs and their religious practices. What they did is they basically stopped fighting God's battles. You know how it is? All of a sudden we get in a place where we're tired of fighting it and we think, I'm just going to give in and be like everybody else. And so they ended up turning to the gods of Canaan to secure the blessings of family, a flock, and a field. And what they did is they really abandoned God's laws of daily living. Just the everyday, hey God, how are you, God? Man, Lord, thank you, Lord. All of a sudden it's like you start going about your life without even thinking about who God is. And you know what? Our lives will reflect that over time when we forget what God has done and who God is. And so the Israelites started this reoccurring cycle, this cycle of disobedience, right? What we call sin. This cycle of disobedience, which then led to oppression from the very people that they were supposed to rid the land of, right? It's almost funny. If you don't get rid of the people God tells you to get rid of in your life, now all of a sudden they're oppressing you, right? And they become the problem in your life. So then that leads them to turn back to God with cries of distress. And then what God would do is he would hear their cries and he would raise up a leader to deliver them from their troubles. This is the book of Judges. And those leaders that were raised up by God were called judges. In the book, there's 12 judges. And it's interesting because even though there's 12 judges, I kept counting 13. And I thought, why is it? I'm counting 13. I literally numbered the judges and went, if there's only 12, how come I'm counting? Well, you know what? One judge self-appointed himself. Abimelech. If you go back and read the book of Judges, you will find out this guy appointed himself. God didn't appoint him. And boy, can I tell you, that was bad news. The way he ended his life, and I'll give you a little spoiler here, is that he was fighting the so-called enemy, and a lady ran up at the top of a tower and had a millstone, and she dropped a millstone from the top of the tower, and it came crashing on his head and practically killed him. But then he was so embarrassed, he did not want the woman to get the victory for killing him, that he told his swordsman, drive a sword in my chest, because I don't want this woman to get the credit for killing me. I mean, how degrading to have a woman kill you, right? And so he ended up having his swordsman kill him. So that was that judge in particular. So he as I said, he met his fate when he did. So this cycle of disobedience, oppression, distress, and deliverance would end up repeating itself 12 times. Hence the 12 judges. Now, Gideon was judge number 5. And he had to remind the Israelites that he was not their leader, but that the Lord was their king. And so it says in Judges 8:23, but Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And so as bad as Israel was really during that time, what we also see emerging in the story of the Judges is the covenant faithfulness of God. That God is faithful. God is a God of integrity because his word is true, his word is good. And if you think about it in our own lives, in our own stories, isn't it really God the only one you really can depend on? I mean, sometimes we get angry at God, but you know what? It's God that is the steady. He's the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow, right? He's going to be the same all the way across. He's the God of integrity. And I got to tell you, that's a good deal because some of the judges that God even appointed, they themselves were not the greatest of people. They themselves were unfaithful too. Even though God appointed them, they fell so short. And Samson is a great example of a man who lacked integrity. I'm sorry, I've got the old movie, Cecil D. DeMille. I was trying to find a decent picture of a Samson with Delilah, but and I ended up with Victor Mature up there. So, but you know, Samson had some issues, did he not? He's chose by God, and he just kept going. Anyway, I'm going to get back to Samson. Now, Ruth, on the other hand, Ruth is the story that's actually hidden within the story of the Judges. This, you wouldn't even know it, but it actually is a story that comes out of this dismal time. And this is the way the story really quickly goes. A family of 4 from Bethlehem, a father, mother, and 2 sons, they are narrowly escaping a famine that's happening in Judah. And what they do is they travel to Moab in order to begin a new life so that they can escape from this. You know, you think about how the Judges, I mean, Israel's always being messed up because they keep sinning and then they get in trouble because all these enemies are after them. God has to deliver them, and it kept happening and happening and happening. Well, during this time there was a famine, and they left for better prospects. Well, the 2 sons end up marrying Moabite women, right? These are Israelites. These are from Judah, the tribe of Judah from Bethlehem, and they marry 2 Moabites. And things just do not go well for this family. Mother Naomi ends up losing her husband first. They no longer get there, and he dies. And they don't say how he dies. And then 10 years later, her 2 sons die. And it doesn't say why. But I can imagine with all this fighting that Israel's doing with all their enemies, somehow the 2 boys die. And it leaves Naomi with only 2 daughter-in-laws and no grandkids. These are 2 young ladies that have no kids. They're childless. And so the name of these 2 daughter-in-laws are, I always want to say Oprah. It's not Oprah. It's Orpah. It's like Oprah, but the R's in the other spot. It's Orpah and Ruth. There's where the story comes in. Orpah and Ruth. Now, Ruth, the story really focuses on Ruth's unswerving and selfless devotion to her widowed mother-in-law and childless mother-in-law. And it also focuses on the kindness of a relative, Boaz, who ends up being the protector of these 2 widowed women when they return back to Bethlehem. That's kind of the essence of the story. And so one of the very, very best scriptures in the book of Ruth, you may have heard this scripture, but it's when Naomi is trying to convince Ruth and Orpah, okay, when she's trying to convince both of the girls that they really should go back to Moab because they would have a much better life there. They're young, they can remarry there. Don't follow me back to Bethlehem because I'm going to go back and I have so much heartache, I have so much heartbreak. You would not do yourself a favor. It would not be wise if you went with me to go back to Bethlehem. Go, be with your own people. Go remarry. Go have children with someone else. Well, both of the daughter-in-laws, they cry. But what ends up happening is that Orpah kisses Naomi and leaves and goes back to her people. And this is the most amazing line. Sometimes you hear it in weddings for husband and wife, but this is the most amazing line that Ruth says to her mother-in-law. This is Ruth 1, verse 16 to 18. But Ruth replies, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And Ruth actually stayed true to her word. She stayed with her mother-in-law. And so Ruth and Boaz, these are people that exemplify integrity. They are the ones. Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer. Now, there's a whole story behind that. You're going to have to read Ruth to find out what a kinsman redeemer is. And then he becomes Ruth's husband. And then he becomes the father of their child Obed. And if you know anything about that family line, Obed has a son Jesse, who has a son King David, who is the line of Judah, who is part of Jesus' line and birth. And so out of this Moabite woman, see, it tells you we're all mixed. We're all mixed. It's okay. You don't mix faiths, but it's okay to mix culture as long as we're all pointing to Jesus, Amen. Right? Okay, it's a Jesus thing. So the Moabite marries the Israelite, and they are noted as people of integrity. As a matter of fact, in their speech, they have integrity. In their work ethics, you will read about integrity. You will see that Boaz, it says that he was a man of standing among the people. And it will also say that Ruth is a woman of nobility. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful thing to have said about you in the Bible forever and ever and ever. Now, integrity, can I tell you, does not mean perfection. That's what it does not mean. It doesn't mean that we'll always do things right. Because I got to tell you, from time to time, we all slip up and we're all going to blow it. So that's not what integrity is. Living a life of integrity means that you are not compartmentalizing your life so that you appear different ways to different people. That's more of a correct understanding. You're not, what you're doing is, you're not doing like, here's my church life, here's my work life, here's my Friday night life. Or you're not doing, here's the way I act with my friends, here's the way I act with my family, and here's the way I behave behind closed doors when I'm all by myself. No. To be a person of integrity, you need to act the same way at home as the same way you would be when you're not at home, right? It's not, right? It's not all those little pieces all over here and there and here and there and here I am over here. Oh, God, she's really different over there. When she's at church, she's not like that at all. But then I see her, and you do one of those. Integrity, I got to tell you, comes from a word integer. Integer. It's actually a math term. It's Latin, which means whole or unit of one. Integer. As Pastor Rick Warren says, your life is not a bunch of pieces of pie, but the whole filling in the middle. You act the same and are the same no matter where you're at or no matter who you are with.
Amen.
That's having integrity. So integrity means what you see is what you get. What you see is what you get. There's another word for that. Authenticity. You're authentic to who God made you to be. Once you've said yes, especially to Jesus, you should be the same wherever you are. Now, the opposite of integrity is duplicity. Duplicity. That's knowing the truth and not living the truth. Duplicity. There's another word for that. It's called deception. Deception. Now, deception is living a double standard or living a double life. It's not, and if you think about it, anything double means you're not thinking whole. Whole. It's not I'm over here, I'm this way. It's now, to make a easy correction here, because I talked to Tina about this, it's not that you can't put on a different hat. Here's my mom hat, here's my I go to work hat. Now that's a little bit different. I'm talking about character of person. How are you in character where you are at? You should be the same in character no matter where you're at. And so Proverbs 11:3 says this, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Now, when we know we're one way and yet we're acting another way, that is false to who we need to be. And so now that's just one aspect of integrity. Or as Christian author C.S. Lewis says, and we've heard this before, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. That's integrity. And so, people who lack integrity, you know what? They end up being very vulnerable. Very, very vulnerable. And here's the reason why. If they separate their life into segments, like, this is my social life, this is my church life, this is my sex life, I'm going to cry now, this is my old party life, this is my secret friend on Facebook life, what happens is we begin to weaken our own character because we are not acting in the same way with integrity. That's what's happening when we begin to do this. Your life becomes compromised. Compromised. It's divided. It's split. And if something's divided and split, there's not integrity in that anymore. Nothing is helping to glue it together because you're these different people everywhere you go, and people really don't know who you are because you've got this secret life that's happening. And so going back to Samson, I've got to go back to Samson in Judges. He lacked integrity to no end. Although he was chosen by God, he continuously fell short of the mark, because he kept compromising his character by acting actually contrary to the way that a man of God, a chosen man of God, should act. And so, if you think about it, his life, oh my goodness, God chooses him and gives him like these set of rules to kind of live by, and he kept going outside of the lines. He kept busting out of the borders all the time. And so sadly, he ended up paying a very heavy price because of it. But I got to tell you, God still accomplished his plan through Samson, right? Because he said, hey, Samson, you need to get rid the land of the Philistines that were oppressing them. And so he did that. But Samson lacked integrity, and it cost him his life. Right? He got the job done because God was going to see that the job was done, but it cost him his life. And so integrity is doing right before God and man. Before both. Integrity is a virtue. It's a virtue that I hope that we all want to strive for. Believe me, we all fall short. I'm not saying, I fall short of that myself, but it's something that we need to strive for, to be as much whole as we can in whatever places we go to. And so, if you think about it, integrity comes from your values. What do you value? Are you living out of your values? Are your values good values, first of all? Do they line up with something that God would be pleased with? And are you living out of your values? Now, if any one of you here right now were to start a business, I would sure hope that one of the top qualities that you would look for when you're hiring a person to work for you would be this attribute of integrity. Wouldn't you want somebody with the attributes of integrity? I mean, you think about it. Integrity on the job is, I think of someone who is honest. I think of someone who is trustworthy. I think of someone who shows up. And they not only show up, but they show up on time. People with integrity show up on time. And they show up to do their job. The job that they're hired to do at the business that is trusting them to come do the job. Now, I know we may live with or work with a lot of people who don't seem to keep up with their integrity. But you know what? That's between them and God. You do at least what you know you should be doing, right? And what they do is people with integrity, they follow through. They are accountable. Accountable. Man, I typed in the word integrity at the workplace just to see what it would come up with. And I'm just going to show you a list of hallmarks that companies put down. Here's a mark of integrity. People who are gracious, respectful, honest, trustworthy. I better read them off here. Hardworking, responsible, helpful, patient. That's what they listed. And that's only some of what integrity entails. And when I read that list, I thought to myself, boy, that sounds like a Boy Scout. I just listed the Boy Scouts right there. But you know what? Or it could be a man or woman of God. Right? A man or woman of God should have these very same attributes. Knowing that they have the fruit of the Spirit within them.